Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Llivina, and tonight, we have one hell of a show for you. Because tonight we're talking about the Tampa Bay Rays. Previously, we've discussed the Baltimore Orioles, the Toronto Blue Jays, and sure, that was pretty great. But we're talking about a team right now that went 2-1 last week. 2-1. Just imagine. They do that over a whole season. That's like, 120 games won? It's pretty good. Let's see if they keep it up. But first, before we get into all of that, I got some trivia for you. I swear to God, trivia is going to keep me in business. You know, lots of people have hot takes, right? We've all got them. But only I can give you trivia. That's what you're here for. So, let's say, for the sake of argument, that Mike Trout is batting, right? And Trout is batting against Max Scherzer. So Scherzer throws a pitch in the dirt, and Trout swings at it. It's not really a swing, though. It's like a check swing. So he takes a swing, pulls it back, and the first base coach calls it a strike. And Trout doesn't think that's the case. So Trout stands up and just says, "Hey, man, no, I checked my swing. It's a ball." And the first base umpire says, "No, you went around. That's a strike." So Trout and the first base umpire are jawing at each other from 90 feet away, literally. Trout's over here, the umpire's over there, and they're both squawking at each other right then and there. And Trout is saying some disrespectful things to the umpire, you know? And the home plate umpire, let's say it's someone who's pretty good, like Angel Hernandez. So Angel Hernandez is listening to this, and Angel throws Mike Trout out of the game, ejects him for something that Trout said to the first base umpire. So Trout gets thrown out of the game by the home plate umpire, and the Angels manager runs out and says, "You can't do that. You can't eject Mike Trout for saying something to a different umpire." So here's the question. Is a home plate umpire allowed to throw a player out of the game on behalf of another umpire? And while you're pondering that, let's talk about baseball facts and figures. So, the theme for this week has been the American League East. And why not? My mom went to Johns Hopkins. My good friend is a Baltimore Orioles fan. I thought we'd just keep the trend going. So, tonight we've got to talk about the Baltimore Orioles. I clowned on them last week. A little bit. I clowned on them because I was like, they're a good team, but their rotation has too many questions. I'm not sure that John Means has durability. I don't know, man. I'm guessing 100 losses this year. A bold but safe prediction. I felt pretty confident about that. But so far, Baltimore is off to a 3-0 start. 3-0. They haven't lost a game yet. They're undefeated. They can go like the 2012 Patriots and just not lose a game the entire season. They're doing great so far. They're on their way. So 3-0, they have a plus 13 run differential, which means that they've scored, on average, 4 more runs per game than their opponents. That's really good. And they've done it on the road. And tonight they're playing against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Can they do it? Who knows? But I wouldn't bet against them. And then in their same division, Tampa Bay, tonight's belle of the ball, is 2-1. So 2-1's pretty good, right? It means they're on the higher end of mediocrity, right? 2-1, small sample size. But one thing you got to keep in mind, their differential is -2, which means that they've actually been outscored in all 3 of their games. So on average, they've lost more runs than they've actually generated. But again, 3-game sample size, nothing to worry about. The Blue Jays are also 2-1. They're playing right this second at Texas, and they've got +1 run differential. They've given up 8 runs. They've scored 9. Pretty good. The Yankees are 1-2. They've won 1 game. They've lost another. And their differential is -1. Tough. And the Red Sox, wow, are 0-3 with a run differential of -13. Let me say that again. -13. The Red Sox have scored 5 runs. They've allowed 18. That's terrible. I mean, I thought their pitching staff would be at least decent this year, but they're really bad. So remember, last year, the Red Sox were surprisingly not very good. They finished at the bottom of their division, right along with the Orioles. So I thought, it's a fluke, maybe just the pandemic. They lost some players. It happens. Everybody kind of threw it in this year. But Boston is now 0-3. And I wouldn't be too worried about that, but their differential, their trend of runs scored versus runs allowed is really bad. I'm more worried about that. Nevertheless, in the AL Central, the Minnesota Twins, are 3-1, differential of +16, which means they've scored on average 4 runs per game more than their opponents. Really, really good. The Kansas City Royals are 2-1, differential +7. Detroit is even, 2-2, 500, -11 differential. You know, I gotta say something about Detroit. I know 2 players that are on their roster. So, Casey Mize, the number 1 draft pick of 2018, went to my alma mater, Auburn University, War Eagle. And he is from Sparkman, Alabama. I played Sparkman when I was in high school. Good team. I don't know if I've ever met him personally, but I think I'm only about a year older than he is. So, I wouldn't be surprised if I've met him just in passing somewhere. But he's playing for the Tigers now. And Daz Cameron. Daz played my team in high school. I definitely met him. And he was nice. During the game, I was in the bleachers, and we were playing in Georgia. He went to McDonough High School. And we were just sitting there in the bleachers. And I remember, before the game, I skipped the warm-ups and tried to go to the bleachers to find Mike Cameron. Because I heard people whispering that Mike Cameron, who was an all-star outfielder for the Tigers for many, many years, and the Mariners too. I thought that Mike Cameron was in the game because I heard parents say, "Oh man, Mike's here, Mike's going to be here." So I want to get his autograph. So I found my dirty baseball gym bag with all these ratty baseballs, my cleats and stuff that smelled like an outhouse. And I got him out here and found a school pen for like a homework thing I was doing in the bus. And I ran into the bleachers in my game day uniform and tried to find Mike Cameron, Sr. And my perspective was, hey, Mike's an all-star outfielder. He played Major League Baseball. He was really good. Other people are saying he's at this game right now. I would love to get his autograph, maybe a picture, maybe ask him for some tips about how to hit and how to beat his kid's team in the game. And other parents and my teammates and normal people were like, dude, he's not going to sign an autograph for an opposing player. It makes no sense. But I spent like 20 minutes trying to find Mike Cameron and couldn't do it. I think he was in the parking lot trying to hide from people like me. So, but yeah, I did meet Daz Cameron. He's a pretty nice guy. And I think he's in AAA right now. He got assigned to Toledo for the Mudheads organization. So he's in AAA right now. But the Tigers are 2-2. Cleveland is 1-2 with a +2 run differential. And remember, this is the last year they will keep their team name. They've already removed their logo of Chief Wahoo, and now they're trying to find an alternative name for the club that's not offensive or insensitive. So we'll see how that goes. I would love it if they went back to the Spiders, because Cleveland used to be called the Cleveland Spiders, and I think that's a cool name. They had a cool logo, and this was back in the 30s and 40s. I think it would be a pretty awesome team name for the Cleveland Spiders to make a reappearance. And last place is Chicago White Sox at 1-3 with a -2 run differential. So the White Sox have scored 22 runs in 4 games. Yeah, you heard that right. That's about 5 runs per game. But they've allowed 24 runs per game. 24 runs in 4 games. So it's 6 runs per game, differential of -2. Now in the AL West, leading the division is the Houston Astros at 4-0, and hold on to your hats, a run differential of +26. You know, I have his classmate from the Houston area named Jordan, and Jordan told me that she wanted her team mentioned on the podcast because they are now 4-0. They just swept the Oakland A's, and they outscored their opposition by a margin of 35-9, which is just incredible. So that's just a great team so far. The LA Angels are now 3-1 with a +2 run differential. The Seattle Mariners are 2-1 with a +2 differential. The Texas Rangers are 1-2 with a -7 run differential. And the Oakland A's are 0-4 with a -26 differential. Now that makes sense because Houston clubbed them, Oakland is reeling, so that makes sense. In the NL East, back in National League this time, Philly, is 3-0 with a +6 differential. Miami is 1-2, +2, and the Mets and the Nationals have not played a game yet, which just is incredible to me. So, if you haven't been following along, the Mets and the Nationals are supposed to be playing a series, but because of coronavirus concerns, both teams have elected not to play for a while. Now, the Mets will have their debut tonight against Philly, and the Nats will be playing tomorrow against Atlanta. But still, bizarre, because, the Athletics have already played 4 games, and they haven't played 1 yet. So maybe some doubleheaders coming up soon, who knows. But Atlanta is now 0-3 with a -6 differential. So I know that Mike Soroka, their ace, has not been playing, so maybe that's got something to do with it, but still -6 differential. In the NL Central, the Chicago Cubs are now 2-1 with a +3 run differential. The Cincinnati Reds are 2-1, +9 differential. They scored 27 runs. Milwaukee Brewers are 1-2. Pittsburgh's 1-2. St. Louis is 1-2. So 3-way tie for the bottom. And in the NL West, my division, my hometown Arizona Diamondbacks division, the Dodgers are unsurprisingly off to a lead, 3-1, .750 winning percentage. And on the one hand, I'm happy because, Mookie Betts is on that team. And my friend Thomas and I are in the same NBA class, and we together are co-owning a fantasy baseball team. Thomas and I got the first pick somehow. And for the first pick, we chose Mookie Betts. Obviously, if it's about the best player overall, Mike Trout. But Mookie Betts has power, he steals bases, and he gets the counting stats that fantasy drafts love to give points for. Because remember, fantasy baseball isn't based on WAR or cumulative performance, it's based on counting stats. So Mookie Betts is usually the consensus pick for number 1. So we chose Mookie, and so far he's doing pretty well. So on the one hand, my points are going up, and I feel happy about that. But on the other hand, the Dodgers are doing that at the expense of my Diamondbacks. Because as long as the D-backs are in this division with the Dodgers, we're never going to win a championship. So Dodgers are 3-1, right? +5 differential, right on schedule. The Padres are for real. They're 3-1 too, with a +8 differential. Blake Snell was on the mound last night, and he was just dealing, man. Blake Snell's on the mound. They got Chris Paddock. They have Yu Darvish. This team is legit. And don't get me started on people like Josh Naylor or Fernando Tatis, sorry. They're going to be good. This is a good team. Now, the Giants are next at 1-2. They're at a -2 run differential. And I don't know about the Giants anymore, man. I know that their farm system is kind of lackluster. It hasn't been doing a whole lot lately. So I hope the Giants get their act together because the Dodgers need some competition. And they're not getting it from the Diamondbacks or the Rockies. For that matter, the Diamondbacks are 1-3, my team, -8 differential. By that figure, they're the worst team in my division. And here's the thing. I love my team, which is why I'm its harshest critic. I'm like a parent. I'm like an Italian mom or dad, you know? I want my kids to succeed. And the D-backs just are not doing that right now. Hopefully they turn it around, but so far I'm not seeing it. And the Rockies are 1-3, -5 differential. They scored 21 runs. They've given up 26. Not good. And tonight, the Diamondbacks and the Rockies will be playing each other. And I gotta say this, man. The Rockies aren't a good team, but I like them anyway, you know? I see the Diamondbacks and the Rockies as junior players in this division. I like them a lot. I want them to win. So that's basically baseball right now as it stands, around the horn. And I've seen some great stuff so far. There's this website called Pitcher's List. And Pitcher's List shows you the nastiest pitches of the day or the week. So it's this website that compiles pitches from around the league. And they make a list, a ranking every single day of the best pitches from around the league. And I've seen some crazy stuff. So there's this guy named Chaz Rowe who pitches for the Tampa Bay Rays. And Chaz has this insane slider. It's just unbelievable. So he went out there and he made the list like 6 times. All of his pitches that day were on the list because they were moving like a foot each. It started off on the right side of the plate, and by the time the batter swung, it had moved 12 inches to the other side of the plate. It was unbelievable. So Chaz Rowe's slider for the Rays, mind you, is doing exceptional. And also, today, Nelson Cruz of the Minnesota Twins, at the age of 40 years old, tallied 10 total bases. He had 2 home runs, drove in 5 runs, got 10 total bases. He is a beast, and he's not slowing down anytime soon. And right now, for the league leaders for batting, Cedric Mullins for the Baltimore Orioles, that team that's now 3-0, undefeated, he's batting .692. Yes, you heard that right. Cedric Mullins is batting nearly 700 for the year. Now, granted, it's probably in like 9 at-bats. But still, can you imagine 700 batting average? That's insane. Cavan Biggio for the Blue Jays hit a home run against Marcus Semien. Wait, no, hang on. Marcus Semien and Cavan Biggio went back-to-back against Fultonowicz, the pitcher for the Rangers. So now the Blue Jays are up 3-0 in the second inning against the Rangers. Whit Merrifield, the second baseman for the Royals, has now hit 3 home runs. Nate Lowe for the Rangers has now led the league in 10 RBIs. Jose Altuve is leading the league in runs scored. And by clicking on some more stats for hitting, you'll see that in OPS, Nick Castellanos of the Reds has an OPS of 1.947. That is incredible. And second on the list is Ketel Marte, my Diamondback center fielder. He's got an OPS of 1.674. Third is Whit Merrifield at 1.625. Fourth is Corey Seager of the Dodgers, 1.583. Fifth is the aforementioned Cedric Mullins at 1.524. And sixth is the fellow Cuban, JD Martinez, at 1.500. You know, Martinez is from Hialeah, Florida, which is where all the Cubans went after the Bay of Pigs. So we probably know each other or have family in common or something. But I like that guy for that reason. And pitching-wise, there's some great stuff there too. So leading the league in innings pitched, which isn't the sexiest statistic, but it's a useful one, is Aaron Savale of the Cleveland Indians at 7 innings pitched. Not much. And strikeouts, Jose Berrios is leading with 12 strikeouts. Shane Bieber Fever is leading again at 12 strikeouts tied. Corbin Burns pitched well, 11 strikeouts. And Trevor Bauer has 10. For whip, the leader is, 0. Berrios pitched 6 no-hit innings his last time out. 12 strikeouts, only 1 hit by pitch, which doesn't count, for whip of 0. John Means for the Orioles pitched great, whip of only .14 because he only had 1 hit in 7 innings. And Zach Wheeler pitched 7 innings, gave only 1 hit with 10 strikeouts of his own. Good performances so far. And for saves, well, Diego Castillo of the Rays has 2 saves. And on that note, the Rays, let's save that and use it as a bridge for next segment. And in the next segment, we'll be discussing the Tampa Bay Rays, their expansion draft, their colors, their history, their owner, their analytics, their fans, their dark years, their light years, and finally, its pride and joy, culminating in a 2020 World Series appearance. Stay tuned for more history, only at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thank you very much.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We're back for segment 2 of this week's episode. We're talking about the Tampa Bay Rays. Before we get into that, time for the trivia question of the day. So before I asked you, let's say that Mike Trout is batting, he checks the swing, the first base umpire says that he swung at the pitch, and Trout says that he didn't. And now there's a kerfuffle. And now Trout is yelling at the first base umpire, and the first base umpire is yelling at him back, and Trout says some questionable things. And the home plate umpire, let's say it's a fair and reasonable guy, like, I don't know, Angel Hernandez. And the umpire, upon hearing what Trout says to a first base umpire, ejects Trout on the spot. The question is it legal for the home crew umpire, the home plate umpire, to eject a player on behalf of another umpire? And the answer is yes, it's totally legal. In fact, it happens frequently. So the home plate umpire is the umpire in chief, and he gets the ultimate authority on ejecting players who have been unruly in the game. So it's actually totally possible for a home plate umpire to eject Trout or any other player in this scenario. And now it's time for our second trivia question. So as you probably know, baseball bats come in a variety of shapes and sizes, right? Like there's ash bats, there's maple, there's bamboo, there's regular handle, there's teacup bats that Rod Carew had, there's axe handle bats. There in high school baseball, there's BB core and aluminum bats. And in college, there's hybrids, things like that. And I wanted to ask you, what's the story behind the first ever Major League Baseball bat modification? Yeah, you heard that right. Before, in the 1890s or so, baseball bats were all exactly the same. They only differed slightly in terms of size and weight. But they were all ash, they were all cut from the same type of wood, they were all produced by the same company. So here's the story. What's the story behind the first ever customized bat? And what I'm talking about here is the two-toned bat. So players like George Foster had the Foster finish, the black barrel and a white handle. And Barry Bonds had that brown handle and a black barrel. And many other players had two-toned baseball bats. So my question is, which company, what's the story behind the first ever two-toned baseball bat, where parts of the bat were in different colors? And while you're pondering that, it's time to talk about the Tampa Bay Rays. I'm talking about the Rays this episode because I have this friend named Hunter. And Hunter is my classmate for an MBA school. Hunter is from the Tampa Bay area, and he loves baseball. He loves it so much that he actually has liked the Tampa Bay Rays on his LinkedIn profile, which is just hilarious to me. But he actually texted me and had some great stories and some insights, and I wanted to share them with you on the podcast. So Hunter just said that this was his first year that he has not been to opening day for Tampa Bay. Because before, every single year has been alive. He's been to Tampa Bay to watch opening day baseball. And because of the pandemic and because of situation, this is the first year that he has missed an opening day since 2004, which is incredible to me. Because I never saw opening day. I'd say spring training because the games are cheaper and they were held in Tucson's Electric Park, which was about 10 minutes away from my secondary school. But I've never seen opening day before. And the fact that Hunter, my classmate, saw opening day every year for 16 straight years is unbelievable to me. So Hunter, man, that's an awesome story, man. That's awesome. And he told me that he was at the game when Matt Garza, the former starting pitcher for the Rays, pitched a no-hitter. The team's first ever no-hitter. My boy Hunter was at that game. And if you don't know about it, that was an amazing day for baseball. So Garza pitched his first no-hitter on July 26th, 2010, at home in Tropicana versus the Detroit Tigers. He became the fifth pitcher that season to throw a no-hitter. It was also the first no-hitter in team's history. So he faced 27 batters, the minimum, and the only base runner was this right fielder named Brendan Bosch, who walked but was immediately erased by a double play hit by Ryan Rayburn in the next at-bat. So Garza threw 120 pitches, 80 of them for strikes, got 6 strikeouts, and 101 of those pitches were fastballs. So imagine throwing a no-hitter, only walking one guy, and 101 of your 120 pitches were fastballs. There's no variety. He was just rearing back and throwing them. Pooh, pooh, pooh. Just all fastballs, nothing else. Changeups are for suckers. So he did that, and Hunter saw that. And he told me that he also went to both World Series games. So the Rays went to the World Series, the Fall Classic in 2008, and Hunter went there in Game 2. And in 2002, he went to the World Series in Game 4, where he watched as Brett Phillips hit a walk-off home run in Game 4 against the Dodgers. So Hunter was there for all of that. And I just think it's a great story because I'm sure he remembers that vividly and broadly. Because that's what baseball does to us. Baseball connects us. And we have these fond memories of a time where we were younger. And we remember these elated moments in history that will always be immortalized. Hunter will grow up, he'll have a great life somewhere, and he will always remember that day when Phillips hit that home run against the Dodgers. And that's baseball for you, man. That's life. So Hunter, this podcast is for you, man. Let's get started. All of the information that I'm telling you today comes from this book called The Extra 2% by Jonah Carey. Carey is this Canadian author who wrote for many years for Grantland. And he wrote a book about how the Rays, after years of mediocrity and obscurity, using data analytics and sabermetrics, rose above the competition a la the Oakland A's to become a powerhouse in their own right, culminating in a 2008 World Series run. And of course, 12 years later, in 2020, they also made the World Series against the Dodgers. They lost, but it was still an amazing run for them. And overall, I would say the Rays are a dynamic team. They have a .477 career win-loss record, but it's on the rise. And considering how infamously terrible they were originally, that's pretty good, all things considered. So the story of the Tampa Bay Rays is maddening. It's maddening because it's used as a benchmark for how not to open a new team. So what happened was, in the late 1980s, there was discussion about expansion. And baseball had 28 teams at the time. And the most recent team before them to move was Milwaukee, from Seattle Pilots to the Milwaukee Brewers that Bud Selig bought and moved the team. And baseball was having a stagnant attendance, and they wanted more fans to come out in more diverse areas. So they were exploring new locations for a team to emerge and arise from. And there were many proposed locations that they could possibly go into. So there was the Buffalo area, there was Chicago, again, there was Nashville, Northern Virginia, Orlando, Phoenix, Tampa, Vancouver, Charlotte, Washington State. Lots of really good areas. And in 1990, the Florida Suncoast Dome was built. It's now called Tropicana Field. Sound familiar? It was built in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1990 with the purpose of trying to lure a team to play there. So it wasn't like a team was sent to Florida and St. Petersburg built a stadium in response. No, the city built a massive stadium and the hope was a team would fill it. But instead, in 1990, because of some negotiation problems, there is a problem with NHL, there's a problem with getting owners on board. So eventually, what happened was Major League Baseball did expand to 2 extra teams, Denver and Miami. So the Rockies were formed and the Marlins were formed, but no team St. Petersburg. That would have to wait. So now there is just this useless stadium sitting there in Tampa Bay and St. Petersburg, just taking up space. And there was a general consensus that a team had to fill it at some point, but there was nobody who was willing to shell out the money to do it. And there was a lot of pressure. So in 1992, San Francisco Giants owner Bob Lurie agreed to sell his team to Tampa Bay. So Vince Naimoli was this investor from Florida, and he was trying to buy the team from Bob Lurie, and Lurie agreed. So there was a handshake deal, and the deal was this. The team would become the Tampa Bay Giants. San Francisco would get rid of their team, Tampa Bay would acquire it, they'd go to St. Petersburg, and that would be it. But at the last minute, at the 11th hour, minutes before the deal was going to become official, MLB owners nixed the move. See, the MLB has extremely strong unions and negotiating boundaries, and the MLB owners chose not to approve the sale because they were worried that it would disrupt the market, and they preferred to keep the team in San Francisco. So what happened was a team of investors instead bought the team and kept it in San Francisco. And Naimoli was furious because he had a deal. And now, time was passing, he was trying to own a team, and it was like the universe was kept conspiring to make him not own a team. He was getting angry at that. So finally, in 1995, new franchises were awarded, and this time, things started to happen. So Phoenix and Tampa Bay were new places of expansion. The Arizona Diamondbacks were formed, and so were the Tampa Bay Rays. And Tampa Bay was choosing the Rays name because of its local manta ray population. Vince Naimoli liked the Rays. He thought it was a cool name, kind of tough. He liked it. And the city and the team agreed to call the club the Tampa Bay Stingrays. But there was a problem. As Jonah Carey wrote in his book, The Extra 2%, there was already a team called the Maui Stingrays that already had the rights to the name. And the Maui team wanted $35,000 for licensing. So the name Tampa Bay Stingrays could become the new name of the franchise if Naimoli was willing to pay $35,000. The same price you'd pay for a recent high school graduate to do clerical work. But Naimoli didn't like it. See, Naimoli is a penny pincher to the extreme. Years later, he would gain notoriety for trying to expel a senior citizen from a ball game for bringing in peanuts to the game, even though the sodium was important for his health. Naimoli was that guy. He hated spending money we didn't have to. So $35,000 that it would take to buy the name Stingrays was too much for him. So instead, they called their team the Ray, which was meant to be a play on words of the manta rays and the other stingrays in the ocean. So now the team was just the Tampa Bay Rays, a nonsensical word doesn't exist. And St. Petersburg was their location. They had a stadium. They had their fan base. But the stadium needed an upgrade. Because at the time, the Tampa Bay Lightning hockey team and the Tampa Bay Storm Arena Football League were all using that. And there was a problem negotiating the space and the leasing for the clubs. It was really tough. And $70 million was spent on renovations the year before the team was formed. So the stadium was crumbling. The infrastructure was bad. The bridge to get people to the stadium was in a tough location. And during rush hour, traffic was completely unnavigable. So that was just a tough arrangement. Now, here's what I found interesting. The team was conceived in 1995, right? And they were scheduled to play 3 years later in 1998. Because just awarding a franchise, that's an intellectual thing. It takes several years to build the infrastructure, the talent, the administrative roles, the coaching, before a team could actually start playing. So even though the team was formed, quote-unquote, in 1995, the first game wasn't played until March 29th, 1998. Between that time, the Rays had a lot of work to do. So they built their first minor league clubs in 1996. So they had minor league affiliates playing in 96, 2 years before their Major League Ball club ever saw an out. And in 1997, the Tampa Bay Rays participated in their first ever Major League draft. So, actually, take it back, 1996, they had their first ever Major League draft. The Rays picked at number 29 overall and chose a guy named Paul Wilder, an outfielder from Cary High School in Cary, North Carolina. This was the same draft that people like Jake Westbrook, R.A. Dickey, Eric Milton, Mark Kotze, Chad Green, Eric Chavez, Adam Eaton, the pitcher, Billy Koch, and Chris Benson were chosen. Pretty good talent. Pretty good talent. Other guys that were useful were Jason Marquise, Jimmy Rollins, Milton Bradley, Jock Jones, Alex Cora, Joe Creedy, Jeremy Giambi, Brad Penny, Justin Ducherer, Doug Davis, Jamie Carroll. All those guys were passed up in favor of a guy named Paul Wilder. So that wasn't their best moment. The Tampa Bay Rays wouldn't have their first exceptional draft pick until 1999, after 3 years of practice, with the signing of Josh Hamilton at number 1 overall. Now, if you know anything about baseball, Josh Hamilton was a highly touted prospect, picked number 1 overall by the Tampa Bay Devil Rays in 1999. But remember, he struggled a lot with substance abuse and with addiction, and he spent 5 years out of baseball attending rehab, and he never once saw a major league at bat for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. That never happened. He was traded to the Reds, where he eventually flourished and became a superstar. But the Tampa Bay Rays never got to reap his talent, so that was a wash. Other notable players they could have picked instead were Josh Beckett, Barry Zito, and Brian Roberts. So that was probably not the best pick. The right player, but the wrong time. And between all of this, remember, the Rays' first season is in 1999. They had their expansion draft. And an expansion draft, as you might not be aware, is a draft where an expansion franchise gets to pick other players. So this is like the Rule 5 draft in reverse. A new team has the right to pick players that are left unprotected by other teams' rosters. So other teams have a 40-man roster, and that's a list of all the players that they want for sure, definitely, to play for them at the big league level. Other players in AAA and AA and High A, in the minor leagues, injured list, whatever, can be picked in the expansion draft and just stolen from these teams if they're not on the 40-man roster. So what happened was, the Diamondbacks and the Rays had a draft just for 2 teams, where they were allowed to pick players from other teams who were not on a protected list. So if you weren't on a protected list, and remember, every team gets only a fixed number of protections, they have to leave some players vulnerable. The Diamondbacks and the Rays could have picked anybody they wanted who was left off of those rosters. So the Tampa Bay Devil Rays went first, and they chose a pitcher named Tony Saunders. Saunders was famous for being the first player selected in this draft, but he never really did much in the big leagues. He is most famous actually for taking steroids and being a victim of a horrific freak injury. Saunders, when he was pitching one day, was winding up delivering and just snapped his wrist. Like his arm just broke while he's on the mound. So Juan Gonzalez was batting, Saunders wound up, and his pitching arm just snapped with enough force that the noise could be heard throughout the ballpark. He collapsed on the mound, and the trainer ran out there, and Saunders' arm was just in two pieces on the field, which is one of the worst injuries ever seen in Major League Baseball. His humerus was fractured and tore ligaments in his arm. He actually did return to play baseball, but it was only at single A level, and he wasn't very good there either. He was forced retirement just a year afterwards at the age of 26, and now he works as a stockbroker. So that was an inauspicious debut for the expansion draft. And we're coming up at 20 minutes now, so after the break, we'll talk more about the expansion draft. We'll talk about the early seasons for the Tampa Bay Rays. We'll talk about their analytical departments. And then finally, we'll end with some stories about baseball. Stay tuned for more, only at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thank you very much.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we're back. Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Graham Llivina, and we're talking about the Tampa Bay Rays. Before we continue our story about their expansion draft of 1998 and the players that they picked and the players they passed up, let's talk about the answer to our trivia question from last quarter. I asked you, what was the foundation behind the two-toned bat? The baseball bat that has two different colors on the barrel and the handle. And the answer is, the story is about the Hillerich and Bradsbury Company. It's this woodworking company in Louisville that was opened in 1855. And a 17-year-old boy named John Bud Hillerich was working there. And Bud one day showed up to watch a team in Louisville play in 1884, where their star player, Pete Browning, broke his baseball bat. So Bud invited the older Browning to his dad's shop to craft a new baseball bat on location, on site, to Browning's specifications. So Browning went there, and he tried all the bats out and didn't like any of them. So Browning's walking around this factory, and there's one bat left that he sees, and he wants to try it. And the problem is that this bat has a good handle that Browning likes. But the boy, Bud, was using it to stir paint. And so it was just this baseball bat that was used to stir paint, and it had this brown color that extended all the way up into the handle. So Browning was like, all right, man, you want to try this? And Hillerich said, sure. So Browning took the bat and tried it out. The bat that was used to paint and to mix paint in the factory. So Browning took this bat and used it to get 3 hits that day. And ever since then, Pete Browning swore by a two-toned baseball bat. And many players, like George Foster and Harry the Hat Walker, and many more, swore by the two-toned baseball bat. And that was the first ever baseball bat modification. Before then, it was customary to only have one bat style and color, the white ash solid baseball bat. And since then, there have been axe handle bats, there have been maple bats, bamboo bats, hybrid bats, maple, all kinds of things. And it started off with a bat in Louisville, Kentucky that was used to mix paint. And while I got that out of the way, I got one more for you. The question is it a requirement for Major League players to wear helmets when they bat? Yes or no? And, as an associated question, is there a requirement for those helmets to have flaps on them? And while you're wondering that, let's go back to baseball and the Rays. We're talking about their 1997 expansion draft. So Tony Saunders was the first pick for the Tampa Bay Rays that year, unprotected from the Florida Marlins. He pitched okay for one season and then horrifically broke his arm on the mound during a game, which was terrible. And then the Diamondbacks picked Brian Anderson, a better left-handed pitcher from the Indians, who played 13 years. The Diamondbacks chose Jeff Supan, number 3, another good pitcher. The Rays chose Quentin McCracken, an outfielder from the Rockies, who, ironically, became a better player for the Diamondbacks. In 2001, McCracken was on their roster that won the World Series against the Yankees. So the Rays picked him, but within a year he went to the Diamondbacks and became a very valuable player off the bench for them. The Diamondbacks then picked Gabe Alvarez, and the Rays picked a guy called Bobby Abreu from the Astros. If you don't know, Bobby Abreu is this legendary baseball player. Abreu is one of the Rays players who ever lived. He retired 5th in runs scored at 1,441. He stole 400 bases. His on-base percentage for his career was .396. He's one of only 7 players in Major League history to have at least 900 extra base hits and at least 400 stolen bases. The other 6 players are Barry Bonds, Ty Cobb, Tris Speaker, Craig Biggio, Honus Wagner, and Paul Molitor. Of those players, all of them except for Barry Bonds are in the Hall of Fame. So Bobby Abreu is a legendary hitter. He had .291, 2,470 hits, 288 home runs, the 400 stolen bases. He played for 17 years. He was a great player, and the Rays picked him. And then, within a week after picking him, the Rays traded Bobby Abreu to the Phillies for shortstop Kevin Stalker, a trade that to this day is regarded as one of the worst ever in Major League Baseball history. While Bobby Abreu became a star of the Phillies, Kevin Stalker kind of floundered in Tampa Bay. And Stalker's career kind of set the stage for Tampa Bay early on. Tampa Bay was not successful as a startup team initially. Their first season, they went 63-99. They beat their owner's goal of avoiding a 100-loss season. The next year, they won 69 games. Next year, they lost 92. Next year, they won 62, but lost 100. 2002, they won 55 games and lost 106. One of the worst seasons in Major League history. The year later, they went 63-99. Year after that, they went 70-91. Year after that, 67-95. 2006, they went 61-101. 2007, they went 66-96. So for the first 10 years of a club's formation, the most games they ever won was 70, and the least was 55. They spent their first decade of existence floundering. They never won. They were the worst team in the league. But all of that changed in 2008. And this is, of course, the year that they went to the World Series. The 2008 Tampa Bay Rays blew everybody by surprise. In 2007, the year before, the Rays won only 66 games and finished last of their division, 30 games out of first place. But in 2008, the Rays won 97 games. They improved 31 games over the previous year. They went from dead last to number 1 in their division in the AL East against the Yankees and the Red Sox. They won the ALDS against the White Sox. They won the ALCS against the Red Sox. And they played the World Series against the Phillies. Even though they lost, it was still an incredible series. So what happened? How did they go from the worst team in baseball, literally, to the best team overnight? It started with their owner, Stuart Sternberg. Sternberg considered changing the name. Remember, beforehand they were called Tampa Bay Devil Rays. And team names were explored, like the Aces, the Bandits, the Cannons, Dukes, Stripes, and Sternberg's personal favorite, the Nine. The Tampa Bay Nine, what a terrible name. But eventually, they were just called Tampa Bay Rays. And the Rays time was reflected to mean like a ray of sunshine and not like an actual Tampa Bay manta ray or whatever. But Sternberg increased the payroll to $43 million. They traded for many people, including Matt Garza, the aforementioned no-hitter that Hunter saw, Jason Bartlett, and closer Troy Percival. And their top prospect, Evan Longoria, a third baseman, was expected to be ready at third base. And the Rays also signed the number 1 draft pick in 2007, David Price, to a contract, who was expected to be a fast riser and could contribute as early as 2009. So the Rays were on the up and up. They were the worst team in 2007, but they had things going for them. So they added a few guys. They added Bartlett and Longoria to their infield, and their roster going into 2008 looked like this. They had Grant Balfour, the Australian closer, Chad Bradford, the submarine right-handed pitcher, Matt Garza, the temperamental starter, Jason Hamill, the young pitcher of a goatee, J.P. Howell, an ace left-handed reliever, Edwin Jackson, the German-born right-hander, Scott Kazmir, the best pitcher in franchise history, Trevor Miller, the right-handed pitcher, Jeff Neiman, the 6'9" giant, Troy Percival, the closer. And by the way, I actually met Percival's kid several times. He's a nice guy. David Price, the ace of their staff, Jae Cook Ryu, the Korean import, James Shields, a very good pitcher for a long time, Andy Sunestein, and Dan Wheeler as their pitchers. Catching, they had John Jaso and Diana Navarro as catchers. Infield-wise, they had Jason Bartlett, Reed Brignac at shortstop, Akinori Iwamura at third base, Dan Johnson at first, Carlos Pena at DH, Evan Longoria at third base, and Ben Zobrist as a utility infielder. We'll come back to Zobrist. In the outfield, they had Rocco Baldelli, Carl Crawford, Johnny Gomez, Eric Hinsky, Justin Ruggiano, and B.J. Upton. And for DH, they had the veteran Cliff Floyd. And managing, they had Joe Madden. Here's a genius. The Tampa Bay Rays, after hiring Nate Silver, a genius baseball analyst, began to shift a lot. And they were the pioneers of shifting. And what that means is that if a lefty's up and he tends to pull 80% of his batted balls to the right side of the infield, instead of putting a third baseman on the left side where he's less likely to field the ball, they put him at second base. Because that is the leftward limit of where the batter will hit his baseballs. They put the two infielders on the right side and the first baseman playing back. And the deal is, if you expand the range of the fielders to meet where the guy hits the baseball the most frequently, you'll get him out more often. And that's borne out by the facts and the statistics. And the Rays did this constantly. They didn't invent the shift, but they were the best at it. And chief among them was Ben Zobrist. Zobrist was the second baseman, a slap hitter with no power, until one day Joe Madden, the new manager, encouraged Zobrist to add some loft to a swing. To basically just swing for the fences. To swing earlier on the ball, to pull it, to become a power hitter. Zobrist did that and became a much better hitter overnight, an all-star. And because Zobrist could play 7 positions, left field, center field, right field, third base, second base, shortstop, first base, he became an invaluable asset for the Rays, who could play him anywhere they wanted to and feel confident in his glove. Along with Carlos Pena and Iwamura and Brignac and Bartlett, the infield was on lockdown and led the league in defensive runs saved. And in the outfield, Rocco Baldelli and Carl Crawford were mainstays, along with a young upstart B.J. Upton. Cliff Floyd, their DH, was a veteran presence in the dugout, and their pitching, led by Garza, Nyman, Percival, Price, and James Shields, was surprisingly competitive. And the entire year, the Rays just surprised. In April, they overperformed. In May, they overperformed. And before long, they ended up in the Fall Classic after defeating the White Sox and the Red Sox in the playoffs. And, of course, as you probably know, the Phillies won that World Series. The Phillies won the World Series 4-1. But my friend Hunter actually saw Game 2 that year. Game 2 was a game played in Tropicana Field in Tampa. So James Shields, the young Rays pitcher, who was nicknamed Big Game James for his prowess in the playoffs, was starting. The Rays took an early 2-0 lead in the first inning on 2 consecutive RBI groundouts, which each scored a runner from third base. In the third inning, B.J. Upton singled home the catcher, Dioner Navarro, with Rocco Baldelli being thrown out, giving the Rays a 3-0 lead. Shields removed from the game in the 6th inning after getting into a jam, but he did not give any runs to the Phillies. David Price came in the 7th inning and gave up a home run to Eric Brunlett, a pinch hitter, to make the score 4-1, with the Rays still ahead. And, of course, the Phillies made a comeback late in the game on an error by third baseman Evan Longoria, and Price then, in the top of 9th inning, struck out Chase Utley and retired Ryan Howard on a ground ball to first base to end the game and give the Rays a 4-2 win. And it's moments like this which remind me how powerful baseball is, because he's going to remember that for the rest of his life. I know I would. So the Rays did not win the Fall Classic that year, but they went on, and that year marked a turning point for their franchise. Before, they were just the worst team ever in baseball, right? And since 2008, they placed third, then first, then second, then third. And after a brief period of mediocrity in the mid-2000s, they came back with a vengeance. In 2020, in the year of the pandemic, the Rays went 40-20, won the AL East, and made an appearance in the World Series against the Dodgers, playing them to a 4-2 6-game series. And that was a great season, too. So, the Rays in 2020 had a very good roster. Pitching for them, they had Jose Alvarado, they had Nick Anderson, Anthony Banda, the former Diamondback, Diego Castillo, Yonny Chirinos, John Curtis, Oliver Drake, a guy I love watch pitching, Sean Gilmartin, who is the husband of the former press secretary Kayleigh McEnany, Tyler Glasnow, Andrew Kittredge, Charlie Morton, Cody Reed, Chaz Rowe, best slider in baseball, and, of course, Blake Snell. Catching, they had Mike Zunino. Infield, they had Willie Adames, G-Man Choi, Yandy Diaz, Brandon Lowe, Nate Lowe, Jose Martinez, and Joey Wendell. And in the outfield, they had Randy Arozarena. They had Kevin Kiermaier, Manny Margot, Austin Meadows, Brett Phillips, and Hunter Renfroe. And the manager was Kevin Cash. In 2020, the Rays had a really good team, and they nearly beat the juggernaut that was the Los Angeles Dodgers. And my friend Hunter was at Game 4. Game 4 was legendary because it was the first game since 1986 to end on an error. And remember, 1986 was the year where Mookie Wilson hit a ground ball to first base, and Bill Buckner let it go through his legs at first base. And the Mets won the World Series on that play. So, Game 4 of the 2020 World Series was the second game since then to end on an error. And that was on a hit by Brett Phillips, the outfielder. So, with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th, down 1-2 against Kenley Jansen, the closer, Brett Phillips hit a single into center field. Kevin Kiermaier scored to tie the game, and Chris Taylor, the center fielder, mishandled the ball. It went through his legs. And Randy Arozarena ran to third base, fell down, and began to head back to third base after getting back on his feet. Max Muncy cut the ball off from the outfield and threw the ball to catcher to Will Smith. And Will Smith just missed it. It hit off his glove and went to first base. And then Arozarena reversed and started running towards home plate again. And there, with throw coming in from first base, Arozarena dove in and was mobbed by his teammates, sliding in safely and winning the game 8-7. That was the first game since 1986 to end on an error, and the first game since 1988 to end on a game-winning hit with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th inning. So that was an incredible game, and I'm sure that was just an amazing moment for baseball. And that brings us to today. The Tampa Bay Rays are a club which could do some serious damage in the AL East. remember, this is a club that's gone already 2-1 for the year. Not bad. On their roster, they have Chris Archer, Diego Castillo, Tyler Glasnow, Rich Hill, the ageless wonder, who is now 40 years old, straight up, Chris Matza, Cody Reed, Ryan Thompson, Michael Waka, and Ryan Yarbrough. Catching, they have Francisco Mejia, Joey Odom, and Mike Zunino. And Joey Odom is actually personal to me because he's from Birmingham. Like, he's actually from my own city. I've never met him before, but I think his younger brother went to Mountain Brook or something, but he's a name that is still familiar in this area. In the infield, they have Willie Adames, Mike Brousseau, Yandy Diaz, Brandon Lowe, and Joey Wendell. And in the outfield, they have Randy Arozarena, Kevin Kiermaier, Manuel Margot, Austin Meadows, and the newcomer Yoshi Tsutsugo from Japan. Pretty good. And this is a team that I think could really do well this year. They're 2-1. They're playing the Red Sox tomorrow night in Fenway Park. And I'm predicting, if they play a full schedule, 90 wins straight up. This is a team that will probably make the playoffs if they stay healthy and keep their starters on the field. A lot of it rides on the tall right arm of Tyler Glasnow, but if he can dominate this year like we all know he has talent to do so, the Rays will have a deadly and dominating season. And that concludes the Tampa Bay Rays chapter of this podcast. Coming up next, I've got stories from the dugout and more fun historical stuff that you'll love to hear. Stay tuned for more, only at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thank you very much.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And we're back with the GSMC Baseball Podcast. It's your host, Llivina, and we're still talking about baseball right now. I got some stories for you. Oh man, I got some stories for you. But first, we got to talk about the trivia answer to the question from last quarter. So here it is. I asked you, are batting helmets mandatory in the big leagues? Yes or no? And are the flaps on the helmets mandatory? Yes or no? And the answer to the first question is yes. Batting helmets are mandatory. As many of you know, they were not mandatory for many decades until a guy named Ray Chapman, a hitter, was hit in the head by a pitch from Carl Mays from the Yankees, and Ray Chapman died on the field because of subdural hematoma, and that killed him. So this guy was killed because of an errant pitch that hit him in the head because he was not wearing a helmet. So much like you're required to wear a helmet when you ride a motorcycle or when you wear a seatbelt in a car, a helmet's designed to protect you from the repercussions of getting hit by a pitch. Because a baseball is a projectile. It goes 90 miles an hour on a slow day. It's a small pitch. It can really hurt you. It's just a projectile. So a helmet is necessary to protect yourself from damages. But a flap is not. And this is something that many people don't know. A flap on the helmet is completely optional. So there's a reason why most helmets only have one flap. It's because having a second flap on the ear that's not pointing towards the pitcher is a waste of plastic. So many batters choose to only have one flap. But at lower levels, in Little League and Rec League, where helmets are in less abundant supply, it's usually more cost effective to wear two flaps because both righties and lefties can use them and can share them. It's easier that way. So the big leagues, usually one flap just for most hitters. Younger leagues, two flaps. But you could choose to have just one flap, both flaps, or no flaps at all. I don't know anybody who would wear a no-flap helmet, but it's been done before. Jay Buhner the first baseman for the Seattle Mariners for many years, would wear a helmet with no flaps onto the field. It's because Buhner was scared about getting hit in the head while he was fielding. So he'd wear a helmet with no flaps on it while he's playing first base. Bizarre, but totally legal. And that is trivia question for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And now, we're talking about stories from the dugout. And I love these, man. Like, contemporary baseball is fine, but I just love telling stories from baseball because they're just all wacky and funny and humorous, and you gotta hear them, man. You gotta hear them. So, this episode starts with a story from Jimmy Dykes. So, Jimmy Dykes was a player in the big leagues for 40 years. He played as a player, a manager, and a coach. And even as an old man, he liked to have fun. So one day, when he was involved with the Pirates, the bullpen catcher, Bob Enoch, tells a story, which I think is just hilarious. So, the Indians were playing against the Pirates. And one day, Joe Christopher is playing right field. And a ball is hit to right. Christopher runs in and dives for the ball. He doesn't catch it, but he does catch his glove on the grass. And in doing so, he hyperextends his thumb. So Joe Christopher rolls around on the ground and severely has sprained his hand. And he thinks he broke it. He thinks that he broke something. So he's on the ground, screaming bloody murder. And the trainer, Doc Jorgensen, grabs his medical bag and runs out there. And Joe's screaming, ah, ah, ah. And he's rolling around crying, tears streaming down his face. His hand is just busted up. And his teammates are gathered around him, and it's really serious. The crowd's quiet. Joe Christopher's on the ground, and Doc stretches him out, grabs the medical bag, opens it up, and screams, "What the hell's going on?" Because between innings, somebody replaced Doc's medical equipment with ham and cheese sandwiches. Now, it turns out that Joe's thumb was only sprained. He didn't break anything, he's fine. And nobody admitted to the crime. But Doc was pissed. And years later, even though Jimmy Dykes never admitted to it, Bob Enoch claims that Jimmy Dykes must have done it. So I just think that's just hilarious. Like, imagine going out there and you open your medical bag and there's just someone put sandwiches in there instead of... I don't know. I think it's just the best practical joke ever, man. That's hilarious. Here's another one. It's not a joke, but it's just a funny situation. So this takes place in the 1950s. So this guy named Gil Hodges played first base for the Dodgers for many years. And he hit 370 career home runs. Pretty good. He was a well-beloved player. Everybody liked him. But Hodges was a terrible fielder, and pop-ups in particular drove him crazy. He could not handle pop-ups. So Hodges works out a deal with Jackie Robinson, and the deal was this. Every time a ball was hit, it popped up to Gil Hodges at first base. Every time that Jackie Robinson ran over and caught it instead, he'd get $5. Gil would pay him $5 for every fly ball that Robinson caught on behalf of Gil. And they're doing that, and it works out famously. Jackie's catching him left and right, and Gil doesn't have to embarrass himself out there. Everybody wins. So one day, they're playing in the 1952 World Series. And one day, so during the game, Robinson catches a pop-up that's in Gil Hodges' area. As they trot off the field, Jackie turns to Gil and says, "All right, man, this is going to be $10. And Hodges says, you mean $5, don't you?" And Jackie says, "Nope, it's $10 for the World Series." And the two of them argue about that and haggle until they agree to negotiate and settle on $7.50 for the World Series. And I just think that's kind of a cute story. And here is another one that's a little bit more cerebral. So in 1954, Gil Hodges had the best year of his career. And he shows up in the office of his general manager, Buzzy Bavasi, to talk about his contract for the next year. So Hodges asked for $25,000 large, and Bavasi felt like that was too low. That's the equivalent of, I don't know, maybe like $3 million today's money. And that's a star player. And Bavasi felt like Hodges, who was a nice guy, deserved a higher salary. So Bavasi had decided that $27,000 seemed fair. But of course, Hodges was too meek and too respectful to ask for that. So one day, Hodges walked into the office, and Bavasi says, "All right, Gil, you seem like a betting man. So here's the deal." And Bavasi took out a top hat like Abe Lincoln, and said, "All right, here's the deal, man. Here's the deal. There are 5 slips of paper in here. One for $23,000, one for $24,000, one for $25,000, one for $26,000, and one for $27,000. So here's the deal. You have a 20% chance of getting any particular number. And you can get a 60% chance of getting the number you want or above. So that's the odds. 3-2 that you'll get what you want or more. But whatever you get, you have to get paid." So Hodges agrees. Those are good odds. So Bavasi shakes up all of the numbers in the hat, shakes it really well and good, puts it on the table, and says, "All right, Gil, take your shot." So Gil takes a deep breath, says a quiet prayer, and reaches into the hat. And after a minute, he pulls a slip of paper, and the paper says $27,000. And Hodges is like, "Yeah!" He's happy. 27 grand. It's more than he wanted. And so he's dancing around the office, grinning from ear to ear, and he just turns around and says, "Hey, Buzzy, man, I'm sorry about this, dude. Sorry to do this to you, man." But he's like, "Don't even worry about it, man." So Hodges leaves the office, and the second he's gone, Bavasi just starts laughing. He laughs really hard because Bavasi had written for all 5 numbers to be $27,000. Unbeknownst to Gil Hodges, he had a 100% chance of getting $27,000. So that was kind of a cute story too. And here's one that I think is just so ridiculous, you won't even believe it. So this is about, sticking with the Dodgers theme, Tommy Lasorda. And Tommy Lasorda, if you don't know, is kind of like the kingpin of the Dodgers. Everything that he does is legendary. It's news. He was outspoken, loud, elubiant, magnificent. He was the Dodgers. And until he died, he was the face of the franchise. I actually met Lasorda once when I was a young boy. I was living in Los Angeles County, and there was a signing before a game where Lasorda just came out and signed baseballs. And my parents bought me a new baseball with a mount for it. Brand new baseball, beautiful, never been touched, and a big, big pen. Not a Sharpie, a pen, because that's how signatures come out better. And they were beaming. They were like, "Graham, get that signature, man. Get that signature. Get a beautiful one from a Hall of Fame manager." And when I came back later, my parents were just shocked and aghast because it turns out I got an autograph from the team's mascot before I met Lasorda. And so now there's Lasorda, and then there's Sandy the Sidewinder on the same baseball. And that's just ridiculous. So my autograph of Lasorda has 2 signatures on it, and it can't be sold anymore. So that was just a funny thing. But yeah, I still have the picture of me and Tommy Lasorda, and that's how he was, man. That's how he was. So there is a story that I think is just hilarious, told by another future manager named Dusty Baker. So Dusty used to be a player too, and Dusty was playing for Lasorda in 1976. And Lasorda was always trying to catch his players doing something wrong in the act. Lasorda was a disciplinarian. He was always trying to find guys who did something wrong. So one day after a late game, Baker is sitting in his hotel room, feeling hungry. He's famished. He hasn't eaten since the game. So they're staying in the Hilton in downtown Atlanta, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and Baker wants food. So he calls room service. He picks up the phone and says, once the guy picks up, he says, "Hey, I want 3 eggs with some bacon." And the guy says, how do you want those eggs? And Baker says, over easy. And the guy says, 3 eggs over easy, slab of bacon. The guy then says, all right, what else? Baker says, I want some hash browns. Hash browns! Some toast with some jelly and some butter. Toast, jelly, butter. Some coffee, I guess. Coffee! Some juice. Juice! And then the guy says, all right, man, what room are you in, sir? 1522. And then Lasorda says, Dusty Baker, what are you doing? What are you doing right now, man? What are you doing? It's too late. And Dusty's like, Tommy? What? What are you doing here? And Tommy says, nothing, man. I'm just in the kitchen. And Dusty says, what are you doing in the kitchen, man? And Tommy says, getting some yogurt. And obviously that wasn't, Tommy's just staying up late trying to see if any players are just hanging out or doing things wrong. So he was in the kitchen just hanging out, took an order from Dusty Baker, went with it, and busted him in the act, was found his room number. So Dusty just says that was just exactly like Tommy, man. That's what he would do. He would do something like that all the time. He was a character. And here's another story. So one day, Dusty is playing for the Dodgers in spring training, and they're playing against the Yankees of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Kenny Landrew and him were hanging out. They played 4 innings, and they were removed. And the deal was that once you're taken out of the game, you can do whatever you want, right? There's no restriction there. So Dusty and Kenny leave. They get lunch in Fort Lauderdale. And after the game, the Dodgers were supposed to get on this plane at the airport and fly to another city. So Dusty thought he had time. So the 4 innings they took to play took them 2 hours. They went to get lunch. But unbeknownst to Dusty, the rest of the game went by lightning fast. And before they finished lunch, the game was over. As they drove back to the airport, the Dodgers were getting on the plane. And before Dusty could get on the plane, it took off. So Dusty's now stranded in Florida. He can't get on the plane anymore. The team's gone. And Dusty knows that if a team lands and Lasorda doesn't see him on the flight, there's hell to pay. So Dusty's like, oh man, dude, what am I going to do? Lasorda's going to be over my butt. And his friend, Willie, who's with him, says, don't worry, Dusty. There's no problem at all. I know a guy. So Dusty's friend, Willie, calls a buddy who happens to own a Learjet. And within minutes, but this is before 9/11, Dusty and Kenny get on the flight, this tiny little plane, and fly all the way to another city. And on that flight, they have Coors beer, there's all this wine, champagne, they get drunk, they have a great time on the flight, and they beat the team's airplane to the next city. So then, Dusty greets Lasorda at the airport. He's like, hey man, what's going on? And Tommy can't believe it. He thought for sure he was going to get Dusty in the act and find him and hold him to the fire. But Dusty pulled a fast one on him. And that's just a great story because we all have that fantasy, right, of like a comeuppance, right, showing up our boss. And coming up next is the last and my most favorite story that I'll ever tell. I told this last week on the podcast. During a podcast about the Blue Jays, I told the story, but I'm telling it again because it's my favorite one in the entire book I have right here. And this book is called Tales from the Ballpark by Mike Shannon, a collection of stories and trivia and fun stuff about baseball. This is my favorite story of all time. Here it goes. Gary Bell is this pitcher in the late 1960s playing for the Cleveland Indians. And Bell is this guy who showed up in the book called Ball 4 by Jim Bouton. Gary Bell, Bouton says, is the kind of guy who's good for a club even when he's not pitching well. Because Gary's just an outgoing, happy kind of guy who brings everybody up. But he's also a bit of a hothead. And he doesn't like when people mess with his stuff. That's Gary's rule. So Gary gets traded from the Pilots to the Indians. And the Indians have this clubhouse boy named Billy. And Billy is a psychopath. Billy's like 11 years old. And he and Gary Bell have this energy. So Gary always leaves stuff in his locker, and Billy just loves to mess with it. Like Gary would come back in from a game, and his pants are nailed to the ceiling, right? And his jersey is just cut into pieces. and there's like something like scandalous in Gary's locker. It's always Billy. Billy's behind everything. Billy is like a little psychopath, and he's got it out for Gary Bell. And one day, Gary comes in to the clubhouse. He's wearing an expensive suit, a really expensive suit with pinstripes and a nice tie and cufflinks and wingtip shoes with greaseback hair. He's looking good. And after the game, Gary's got plans. So Gary finds Billy in the clubhouse and says, "Hey, Billy, don't mess with my stuff." And Billy's like, okay. And Gary's like, "No, man, Billy, I mean it. I'm taking my wife out to dinner tonight. We're going out for a romantic dinner in Cincinnati, and you can't touch this. Don't touch anything in my locker." Billy says, okay. All right. And so Gary plays the game. After the game's over, he comes back into the clubhouse, and of course, his pants are gone. So Gary runs over and finds Billy and says, "Hey, Billy, what's going on?" And Billy's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And Gary's like, "Really?" And Billy's like, "Mm-hmm." So Gary just brings over Duke Sims, his catcher, and together they pick up Billy and drag him to the whirlpool. And Billy's screaming, the entire time, bloody murder. And Gary picks up this little boy and dunks him into the whirlpool head first. And Billy's just like struggling. And Gary's saying, "Wear my pants, Billy. Wear my pants, Billy." And he pulls him up after a minute. And Billy is just out of breath, soaking wet, going. And Gary says, "Wear my pants, Billy." And Billy says, "I don't know. I didn't see nothing. And Gary says, "Okay." And they dunk him back in the water. And Billy's screaming, again. And Gary pulls him out again and says, "Wear my pants, Billy." And Billy says, I don't know. I didn't see nothing. And Gary says, "All right, man, I didn't want to do this, but you asked for it." They put him back in the water a third time. And Billy is just screaming. He's screaming bloody murder. People getting freaked out. It's not okay anymore. And finally, for a third time, Gary pulls Billy back in the water and says, "Billy, I'm not asking you again. Where are my pants?" And Billy says, "Okay, I'll tell you. I'm wearing them." My God, dude, that's just that's my favorite story of all time. and that does it for this week's episode, man. So this is about the Tampa Bay Rays, about stories from the past, the dugout, and the draft. Hope you enjoyed it. This is Graham Llivina on the GSMC Baseball Podcast, signing off. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Take care of yourself.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.